Hello, everyone. If you could just take your seats for the last session of the day. So we're coming to the final session. Gordon Cook, unfortunately, has had to rush off to catch a train. He's asked me to introduce two speakers who we've got lined up, who've been newly inducted into the College of Myeloma. So the College of Myeloma is an organisation that's allied to UKMS. And it recognises individuals who've made a contribution to the field of myeloma, either in the UK or abroad. And they'll also provide some support and voice of experience for when reformulating policy, coming up with trials. So we've got three people who we're going to be inducting into the Hall of Fame today. First of all is Matthew Streetley, who I just wanted to mention, who's unable to join us, but Matthew was a long-serving member on the UK Myeloma Society executive. He was particularly important in advocacy work, where he led a lot of the appraisals to NICE, getting over the line many of the drugs that we've got access to today. Continues to be hard at work. I suspect he's hard at work now, but I just wanted to mention him, thank him for his contribution over the years and look forward to his contribution in the future. We've got Professor Ray Poles here, but we've also got, before we come to him, Professor Philippe Moreau should be dialing in from France. So just check he's here.
Good afternoon.
Hello, Professor Moreau. I'll just give a brief introduction for those of you, very few of you who may not have heard of Professor Moreau. Philippe Moreau is a professor of clinical hematology. He's the head of translational research at the University Hospital of Nantes in France. He's had a huge profile in myeloma trials. You'll have seen his name across many of the pivotal trials that influence the way that we practice today. Trials including drugs like carfilzomib, venetoclax, daratumumab, isatuximab, teclistamab. He has received numerous awards, of which this is obviously the highlight. And we're delighted to welcome him today to speak about his experience over the last few years in myeloma. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'm very, very grateful, in fact, for this nomination today. And you can see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. And you know that you asked me to speak about my career, and well, in fact, talking about oneself is very, very difficult for me, but I would be, next slide. Next slide. In fact, I would be nobody, without Jean-Luc Arousseau, my mentor in Nantes, when I met him in 1987, 36 years ago. I'm 60, in fact, to start the School of Hematology. A great mentor, a fantastic man, and also Michel Attal. And the two of them introduced me into the French cooperative group IFM, and to run academic trials. And for sure, one of my first messages is that we need strong, very strong cooperative groups. Next slide. And they trusted me very, very quickly, and I was lucky, very lucky, to be the first author of this paper, the comparison of MEL 200 as a conditioning versus total body irradiation and MEL 140. It was a long time ago, establishing MEL 200 as a standard of care. Next slide. And with the French group, we did many, many studies, as you know, on induction with bortezomib index, with VTD. This is one example. Next slide. We also did compared prospectively VRD versus VRD and autologous stem cell transplantation. And I was very lucky as well to be the senior author of this paper that is discussed in every meeting when we are discussing frontline stem cell transplantation for young patients. Next slide. And you know that we also run the Cassiopeia study, and we were very, very proud, that one academic study, the sponsor was IFM, was able to lead to the approval of the first quadruplet combination VTD plus daratumumab. Next slide. And I had to fight really a lot, to design this MIDAS study that is ongoing. The study is closed for enrollment. We will present the first data at the next International Myeloma Workshop meeting because there are 3 companies that are supporting the study, and discussing with 3 companies to have the money, that's very, very difficult indeed. And so this is the first study that is proposing a treatment that is adapted according to minimal residual disease. Next slide. So we need very strong academic groups, but we need also, and that's my second message maybe, strong collaborations, and a long time ago now, we looked for a very large number of patients treated in France, treated in the Netherlands with the Hoven group, in Italy with the GMEMA group, and in Spain with the PETEMA group, and we merged the data of 4 different studies, more than 1,600 patients, looking at overall survival and prognostic factors for OS. And we were able to show that high LDH, ISS3, and cytogenetics were important prognostic factors. And that was the basis, in fact, of the revised ISS classification. And it will not have been possible without strong collaborations between academic groups. Next slide. And we need also strong consensus, especially when we are speaking about frontline treatment or relapse myeloma patients. And this is one example of what we did. You see that many groups, many authors were involved, in fact, in these recommendations from the International Myeloma Working Group. Next slide. And we also need pharma companies, because we cannot work only with academic trials and have important benefit for the patients without the pharma companies. And this is one very old example, in the past, before the year 2000, we were doing high-dose melphalan with GM-CSF. And this is the first study that I was able to publish, a placebo-controlled trial, in fact, with a pharma company. Obviously, we are never using any more GM-CSF now. The next one. And for example, the sub-Q administration of bortezomib was based on this phase 3 study with the collaboration with Johnson at that time. And next slide. And also, we have promoted Ixalendex based on the phase 3 randomized study with Takeda. Next slide. And DRD, the Pollux study, I was also the senior author of this paper. That's very important for the patients when you're looking at PFS and OS. There is an OS benefit with DRD in the relapse setting for sure. Next slide. And more recently, we tested isatuximab in combination with KD, and the UKMS study is also a very important one for patients LEN refractory, for example. Next slide. And more recently, the revolution of bispecific antibodies, and teclistamab, to my opinion, is a revolution, and bispecific antibodies targeting BCMA or other antigens as well. Next slide. So we need strong academic groups, we need collaborations, we need pharma companies, and we need a society, in fact. And the International Myeloma Society, to my opinion, is really key for the future. Next slide. This is the goal. These are the goals, in fact, of our society. The race to cure myeloma, race for research, advocacy, clinical care, and education. Next slide. I'm very, very happy and proud to be the president for the next 4 years of this society that is very active, in fact. Next slide. We are promoting education, research, and we have now more than 70 countries, and the number of members is really increasing very, very fast, and that's good for all of us. Next slide. And we need to have brilliant co-workers. And I was very happy 2 years ago when Cyril Touzeau, my co-worker, became professor in Nantes, and is working very, very hard with me, and is now the PI of many studies in France and at the international level as well. Next slide. So we need all of us to be united, and I'm again very, very, very grateful to your society for this nomination today. Next slide. And I thank you for your very kind attention.
So thank you again to Professor Moreau. Sorry he can't be with us, but I think we have sent a certificate to him
Yes.
to commemorate this event. So look forward to seeing you in person in future other meetings. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So I would say, how do you follow all of those trials? I think the answer is developing autologous stem cell transplant for myeloma might be one way to do it, which sort of leads me on to the third member who's being nominated today, who's Professor Ray Powells. Again, hugely illustrious career, primarily known for his work at the Marsden, all manner of hematological malignancies, probably less subspecialized than we have to be today. But I think melphalan, high-dose melphalan, followed by autologous stem cell transplantation, who really has been a standard which is only now just starting to be questioned sort of 30, 40 years later. So again, it's a huge privilege for Professor Powells to come to address us today. Thank you very much.
The train before the rush hour. Yes, this is a very, very high honour, and my background is the fact that I was going to go into the army. I'm dyslexic, quite severely. It wasn't known at the time, but I have 4 O-levels, 2 A-levels. Going into the army, nearly died on the street in Oldham High Street. Huge hemorrhage. Spent 8 months in hospital with tuberculosis, and decided to go to medical school. And in those days, you could get in. I would never get in now. And hadn't done any biology. Did biology at first MB, but A level. Immediately took to it, and but also had to do a bit of physics. And there was a Nobel laureate, Rotblat, extraordinary guy actually. And I'll come back to him right at the end of the talk. But the thing is that I got really switched on at medical school and had a great time at Barts. And this is the journey. I was walking across Barts Square, 13th of March, 2018, bumped into my mentor, Hamilton Fairley, the father of medical oncology. And I'd just finished a sequence of things. And I'd done a lot on leukemia, 60 beds, young people, 1967 that was, they all died. But I just sort of wanted to get involved. And I said to Hamilton Fairley, you know, have you got a job? And he said, do you fancy going to Paris? And I said, yes, I'll do that. And I went to Villejuif, and you'll see there on the left-hand side, Georges Mattei, an extraordinary character, most amazing person. And in the middle, there's a child there, and he's got tuberculosis BCG scratched on the arm. And he took a group of childhood acute leukemia, vaccinated them with, in remission, vaccinated them with BCG weekly, and doubled survival. And that was the start of me in tumor immunology. And some 40 plus years later, that's been the story of my life, actually. And now just at the bottom there, you'll see a blood cell separator. And I use that blood cell separator because I learned that in Paris. Spent most of 1968 in Paris. And we wanted to do something different. So we decided to give irradiated acute myeloblastonic leukemia cells to remission patients, adult, younger remission patients with BCG. Right? And again, we saw a marked survival advantage. And now's not the time to talk about that. But the thing is, it was actually they lived longer after they relapsed. And let's forget about the biology of that. But that was extremely interesting. First time it had been done. But on that blood cell separator, and you'll see at the back, there was a double pump. And it meant you could have 2 tubing sets going through it. And you could take plasma off a patient and exactly the same amount of plasma freeze-dried plasma could be replaced. And so we started, which had never been done before, plasma exchange in multiple myeloma. And this would have been about 1969. And I took a group of about 60 or 70 patients. And we did plasma exchange and hyperviscosity. There's a lesson here, by the way. I said plasma exchange in malignant paraproteinemias. If you want to have one message from me today, is be very careful about what you put in the titles of the papers you published, because it's never quoted because it hasn't got myeloma there, right? But but myeloma was a ghastly disease then. People died about 18 months, progressive disease. Oral melphalan was the only treatment available. It was a very poor treatment indeed, actually. And although I was in plasma exchange and hyperviscosity, a selected group of patients, I got, I suppose, about 500 patients over a period of about 3 or 4 years, biggest myeloma practice in probably Europe, because nobody else wanted to treat them. And at that time, the median survival, that's 1977, that's 10 years later, but that's also, well, 8 years later, but with reasonable follow-up. The MRC5 trial, but it was the first real trial they'd done, the median survival was 2.4 years. Right? And that was my introduction to myeloma. Right? And, but the thing is that having done that, I got very involved in tumor immunology. And the left-hand picture is the Royal Marsden Hospital. I went on to have the whole of the second floor there, all the way, third floor, all the way along, 45 beds, team of 100 people, right, on hemato-oncology. Ran that through till about 2004. And the Institute of Cancer Research, the photograph on the right, and there was Peter Alexander. I couldn't find his photograph. There was a pure scientist that I did a lot of the basic scientific tumor immunology work. And that's Peter Medawar, who would come down once a month. He was another Nobel laureate. And I really got into tumor immunology, spent quite a long time with it. We'd seen these remarkable results. And this is the publications. It was the first proper paper on tumor immunology. And also, interestingly, it was the first time that log rank had been used. We collaborated with Oxford. Log rank had been used actually to do comparative analysis. And the guy there, second line, Malcolm Pike, was the person who did it actually. And again, as I said, we had significant prolongation of survival, but it disappeared. But the point is, it was a catalyst. This was pure luck. It was a catalyst. And Don Thomas, who of course went on to get the Nobel Prize on the left there, they invited me over to Seattle because they were doing a whole group of AML patients, and they were all relapsing. Right? I could talk for hours on why and how, but the thing is that he had the bright idea of why not give them immunotherapy. It's a wonderful platform. The guy on the right is Rainer Staub. His mother lived in Germany. Both of them became dear friends, actually. And we had failed, as everybody else had, in allogeneic transplantation. And this is where luck comes in. So I said to Rainer, look, when you next come to see your mother, would you come through Sutton? Would you do a transplant on a patient of mine? Right? And then when you come back from mother, he used to go for 2 or 3 weeks, actually. When you get back, would you have a look at the patient to make sure everything's all right? And that was the first successful allogeneic transplant in Europe. Right? And I'd love to take credit for it, but Rainer did it. And so we did the first allogeneic transplant in Europe. Right? We then did a series of haploidentical transplants in 1983, and I'll talk about cyclosporin in a second, actually. And that was a big series. And then we went on. There was a really interesting combo, and this is quite a nice little story again. And again, it's a bit of luck here. Is a child who had acute myelodysplastic leukemia, transplanted the haploidentical father into him. 3 years later, the father got eosinophilic leukemia. We transplanted the son's marrow, which of course was the father's, back into the father, and both were cured. And there was a beautiful, this is your life thing on it, right? And I got to London Airport the day after that, this is your life thing, right? And I was surrounded by reporters, right? And I hadn't realized the significance of it. If I'd known, I would have organized one of my charity dinners, and I would have raised probably £500,000. right? And so I get into Mumbai and I put the television on and I see a picture of me talking, right, in Urdu. And then I get a text from my John Barrett, my friend who happened to be in China at the time, say, look, I've just seen you on television speaking in Mandarin. And we never spotted the significance of it. We should have known right along that really captures the population. 2 front pages of the Daily Mail, 2 days running. And what that happens then, and again, it's an extraordinary story, is thalidomide was actually being used for leprosy. And there was indications in mice that it would be effective against chronic graft-versus-host disease. And Seema Singhal at the top there, who went on to publish the definitive paper the first paper on thalidomide, she was in my unit at that time, she and Jayesh between them. Just amazing couple, actually. And we even wrote a paper, thalidomide in GVH, right? And that included 2 or 3 patients that we'd done an allograft on them in myeloma, which of course you wouldn't be able to see the effect on the myeloma because they'd had allografts, actually. And again, what an extraordinary story, actually. And now, what about this first autologous transplant? This was a Lancet paper, McElwain and myself, Tim McElwain. He had a tragic death, actually. He committed suicide, actually, and tragic death. And he was probably my dearest friend at medical school. And in Lancet, we published that. And the story there was we'd already done 274 patients with acute leukemia that we'd given high-dose melphalan to as part of autologous transplantation for acute leukemia. I had a patient, because I was looking after the leukemia unit at that time, I had a patient with plasma cell leukemia, gave him 140 of melphalan, and then did an autograft 4 months later when they're in the remission. That's the first autograft that was done in myeloma. It opened a door, because in those days there were no ethics committees. So you actually had huge responsibility on yourself to not do things that were unethical, right? And so that's the story, actually, of high-dose melphalan. And that's a treatment that's persisted for 40 years. We had an INWG meeting, actually, in I've forgotten now, Paris, I think it was, in April. And Ken Anderson, stood up and said, do you realize that to this month, this was 40 years since we did the first autograft? There aren't many treatments that lasted for 40 years, right? And now here's another bit of serendipity, cyclosporin A. I used to teach at the Italian summer school every year, and beautiful. And it was in Arisha, that's a hill town in Sicily. And I missed the main plane going back from Palermo, had to take a small plane that flew me to the coast, right? Tony Allison, a poisonous pure scientist from the Northwick Park, poisonous guy, actually, but here it is. The only seat available, there were 6 seats, I sat next to him, and he said, actually, look, we've got this cyclosporin that's being developed at Cambridge by Roy Carl, but we can't get into a patient because it's nephrotoxic, and they're doing kidney transplants. And within 2 months, I'd actually got it into myeloma patients, which was perfectly easy to do. And that was serendipity. And again, that's a drug that's had the test of time. Acyclovir, same sort of story. With immunotherapy, we were giving Corynebacterium parvum. I went to Wellcome in Beckenham. I was in a room where we were negotiating. Just as I was leaving, Griffith said to me, look, there's a lady in the room next door, and you might be interested in that. And that's Trudy Elliott, another Nobel Prize laureate. She hadn't got it then, but she went on subsequently. And she got the acyclovir molecule, hadn't even got a name, never been to a patient. And I had a patient with herpes simplex pneumonitis. We were able to treat the patient straight away. Again, it's unthinkable now, right? And that was the story of acyclovir. And we published extensively on that. Heinz Ludwig, that spoke earlier on, did meta-analysis on it. I think it was 24 multi-center trials. And interferon is still active. We know it is in all aspects, all parts of the myeloma pathway. And I think it's going to come back as combination with the immunotherapy we've got, right? And now that, I don't know whether you can see it on the screen. Yes, you can, actually. This is now the full circle, actually. This is 47 patients that we've treated at Parkside. with daratumumab. All parts of the pathway, real-world data, right? And what happens with that actually is the fact that we've got survival that we've never seen. And also it's changed the biology of the disease. We don't have inpatients now, right? And we're now using quadruple therapy up front, right? And it's quite startling how beneficial and how well tolerated it is, right? And that's a 50-year journey I've had, a real circle, 50-year journey of immunotherapy of cancer, actually. And if you look at real-world data that we published when I was at the Master in 1997 as a comparison, I had a huge practice of myeloma at the Royal Marsden. And what happens is I was able to use the postcode of the patients to see the ones that we were following full time, but lived within our area. And that was 4.7 years, I think the survival of that was. And so you can see that the survival that I got on that daratumumab pathway, which is definitely about 10 years. It says 17 years on it, but it's 10 years. It's a dramatic improvement, actually, since 1997. And it's really changed the whole shape of myeloma. And now, a little bonus, 2 slides, right? I treated 294 patients with acute leukemia that had autologous transplants and had total body irradiation. So the transplant, there wasn't GVH and so on. And suddenly I had a huge resource there because I suddenly knew a lot about people getting badly irradiated, except we were rescuing them, right? And we set up the EBMT Nuclear Accident Committee. That's opened up the most extraordinary part of my life, right? And it comes back, actually, I think, to being dyslexic, where you get your brain working neurodiverse, actually. And so, just an example at the bottom there, I'm involved with Ukraine at the moment. Did Fukushima and Chernobyl. I've been a guest of the People's Liberation in China, right? In September, I gave a talk to NATO, right? What an extraordinary life we live. Hugely thanks, wonderful honor. So proud to be part of the UK multiple myeloma society, right? So happy to see you embracing everything there is. And, I have no doubt at all that UK right now, with people like Gordon Cook and so on, actually, and the young group that I saw mostly today, we actually lead the world, actually. I'm very, very proud to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Professor Powles. I think there's a certificate for him as well. Just leaves me to sort of close out the meeting with a few bits of administration and thank you. So thank you again to all of our speakers for coming near and far. Thank you to the organisers, that Wendy Notovitz, who does most of all the work really behind the scenes at the UK Myeloma Society, as well as Alex and Derry, who run things seamlessly from collaborative conferences and the facilities organisers here. There will be feedback forms sent to you. If you're online at the moment, please can you make sure that you quit the application rather than just close the browser. That will indicate that you've attended and you'll be able to get the feedback form. Plug for the next meeting in spring, which has provisionally been titled Controversies and Uncertainties in Myeloma. We'll be looking at things like, is there still a role for autologous stem cell transplant? Is 40 years now the time to be reviewing it? Also, should we be treating smouldering myeloma? And if so, when and in what cases? And we've had a confirmation of the next keynote speaker will be Professor Niels van der Donk from the Netherlands, who's speaking about immunotherapies and CAR T-cell therapy. If you have any feedback, please let us know, good feedback and bad feedback, what we can do better next time, what you've enjoyed. And if anyone would like to be involved in running these meetings or the other educational activities that we put on throughout the year, then please get in touch with the Society. So thank you very much for coming and have a safe journey home.